What if I told you that an invisible enemy, smaller than a grain of sand, wiped out nearly half of Europe in just a few years? It turned bustling cities into silent graveyards, emptied villages overnight, and made people question everything they knew, even their faith. It didn't matter if you were a king or a peasant, rich or poor, death came for all. This is the story of the Black Death, the most catastrophic plague in human history. Our story begins in the early 14th century. Europe was a hive of activity, with growing cities and trade routes stretching all the way from China to Italy. But hidden among the caravans and ships was a silent, microscopic killer. Historians believe it all started on the dry plains of Central Asia, where a deadly bacterium called Yersinia, pestis, lurked inside fleas. These fleas lived on black rats, and those rats traveled with merchants, stowing away on their ships and in their cargo. In 1346, ships loaded with grain and goods left the port of Kaffa on the Crimean coast. When they arrived in Sicily in 1347, they brought more than just merchandise. They brought death. Sailors stumbled off the ships, covered in strange black swellings the size of apples on their necks, armpits, and groins. Within days, they were dead. Within weeks, the disease had spread to every corner of the island. People called it the Great Pestilence. Later, it would earn a new name, the Black Death, for the dark bruises that covered its victims' skin. From Sicily, the plague spread like wildfire across the continent, to Italy, France, Spain, and eventually England, Germany, and Scandinavia. The very trade routes that had brought prosperity now became highways of death. By 1348, there was no safe place left in Europe. Imagine walking through the streets of Florence or London during that time. The air would be thick with the smell of decay. Church bells tolling endlessly for the dead. Carts piled high with bodies, rumbling through the empty streets. Priests, exhausted and terrified, giving last rites to dozens every hour. In a desperate attempt to survive, families sealed themselves in their homes. But it was often too late. Parents abandoned their sick children. Husbands left their dying wives. Fear shattered the most sacred bonds. No one dared to touch the infected, even the doctors, clad in their strange bird-like masks stuffed with herbs, were powerless. At the time, no one understood what was causing this nightmare. Some believed it was the wrath of God, a punishment for humanity's sins. Others blamed the alignment of the stars, or poisoned air, or even foreign merchants. Medicine was completely helpless. Once you had the symptoms, fever, weakness, vomiting, and those terrifying black boils, your chances of survival were almost zero. Death usually came within 3 to 5 days. As the death toll climbed into the millions, society began to crumble. Markets closed. Churches emptied. Fields went untended, because there was no one left to harvest the crops. Famine soon joined the plague, creating a perfect storm of misery. Entire villages simply disappeared from the map. In France, half the population was gone in just 2 years. In England, it's estimated that 1 in every 2 people died. And still, no one could stop it. Panic turned to desperation, and desperation turned to horrific violence. In some towns, terrified mobs hunted down minorities, especially Jewish communities, falsely accusing them of poisoning the wells. Thousands of innocent people were brutally murdered, victims of fear and ignorance, not the disease itself. At the same time, religious extremists, known as flagellants, roamed from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, begging God for mercy. They believed the plague was a divine punishment, and that only through extreme suffering could they earn forgiveness. But nothing worked. The plague didn't care about prayers or wealth, or social status. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people. That's nearly half of Europe's entire population at the time. It's as if half of a continent simply vanished. In cities like Venice, Florence, and Paris, entire neighborhoods were wiped out. Monasteries, once centers of learning and hope, became mass graveyards. There weren't enough coffins, so bodies were dumped into massive pits, thousands buried together without names or prayers. The gravediggers themselves often died before they could finish their grim work. In the English countryside, a haunting silence fell. Crops rotted in the fields, castles stood empty, even animals were seen wandering through abandoned villages. By 1353, the worst had finally passed. The plague had burned through Europe like a fire through dry wood, until it had consumed almost everything in its path. But the world it left behind was changed forever. With so many dead, labor became scarce. For the first time in centuries, peasants could demand better wages and more rights, weakening the power of the feudal lords. This was the beginning of the end for the old medieval system. Religiously, faith was deeply shaken. People questioned the church, asking, if God is good, why did he let this happen? This widespread doubt would later fuel the flames of the Reformation and the rise of new ideas. Art and literature became obsessed with death. Artists created grim paintings of the Danse Macabre, or Dance of Death, showing skeletons dancing with the living, a stark reminder that death spares no one. Even language changed, as people struggled to find words for the unimaginable sorrow and fear they had witnessed. The Black Death never truly vanished. Outbreaks continued to reappear across Europe for centuries, smaller but still deadly. London suffered a massive resurgence in 1665, the Great Plague, which killed 100,000 people in just a few months. It was until the 19th century that scientists finally discovered the true cause, the Yersinia pestis bacterium, spread by fleas on rats. With modern sanitation, antibiotics, and medicine, the plague was finally brought under control. But the scars of the 14th century never fully healed. The Black Death taught humanity a terrible truth, that nature can humble even the mightiest empires. It reshaped Europe, killing millions, but also paving the way for a new age of science, progress, and social change. Out of unimaginable tragedy came a renewed understanding of life's fragility. Today, when we face modern pandemics, we see echoes of the Black Death. The use of masks, quarantines, the spread of fear and misinformation, all of it began back then. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of the Black Death. It forced humanity to evolve, to survive, to learn, and to never, ever take tomorrow for granted. Half of Europe perished, but the story of the survivors built the world we live in today.